So let's talk this morning about devotion as part of our practice. And, this notion of devotion, we don't hear a whole lot in Buddhist or Dharma circles. Often it's associated with more theistic, Christian and other theistic traditions. But I would suggest to you this morning that it also can apply equally to our path. It really just means fully committing to the path, to the teachings. And so that, it suggests that we set an intention to make this practice a priority in our daily lives. We devote time, energy, and effort to furthering our progress on the path. And devotion's a kind of a big term. We can be devoted to a person, a cause, an institution, or in our case, a spiritual journey. And it suggests that we believe in that to which we are devoted. In other words, we believe that what we're doing has validity and purpose in our lives, and that it is something which is a positive force in our lives. And one of the things about devotion, because of the commitment that it implies, is it helps us build self-discipline with the practice. Being constant in our practice is a way of helping us cultivate discipline in all aspects of our lives. And with regard to the practice, it assures that we reap the full benefits of the practice. We're not just sort of casually tossing it off. Because if we lack commitment and don't follow through in the long run, then our practice will suffer, and our suffering will persist. We just won't make the gains. We won't fully benefit from the power of these teachings that we talk about here every week. And I'm not here talking about blind devotion, unquestioning devotion, the kind of devotion you might see in a cult or a fundamentalist religious tradition. I'm talking about devotion that's born of wisdom and born of discernment. So we bring discernment, we bring wisdom into this devotion as I'm talking about it today. As the Buddha said about the path, don't take my word for it. This is a paraphrase, obviously. Don't take my word for it. Try it and see if it works for you. And that's the kind of devotion I'm talking about, which is devotion with a healthy dose of skepticism. Okay, we're going to keep our discernment and wisdom in place so that we make sure that it's um, fits with what we're trying to do. The Buddha, during his time, he challenged a number of traditional, more dogmatic devotional practices, behaviors, and rituals of the time. He was a disruptor. I mean, Karen Armstrong, who some of you know, she's an author that's written about lots of different religious traditions, talks about what a disruptor he was during that period in history in northern India. He challenged the conventional wisdom of the time. He emphasized the heart and opening the heart over outward signs of piety. He said all this, gesturing and ritual and outward piety, wasn't really reducing people's suffering. He emphasized qualities like selflessness, humility, gratitude. He taught us that this devotion takes us beyond our egos, our immediate ego needs. And it puts us in touch with something larger and more spacious than ourselves. Before I found Buddhism, I was really not devoted to anything meaningful in my life other than probably sensual pleasure and just, you know, superficial stuff. My world was small. My world was very ego driven. But I always had this longing, this sort of hunger for something more meaningful, even though I really early on didn't know what it was. I just knew that there was something missing in my life with all this material seeking, grabbing, accumulation. But I didn't know what it was, as I said, but I knew sort of intuitively that it was probably something spiritual. Um, Devotion, as I'm talking about today, can be skillful, is on our path, or it could be unskillful, like the devotion to accumulating greater wealth or more stuff or whatever. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about reminds me of the teaching of Hungry Ghost. Some of you may be familiar with this teaching. Hungry Ghost in Buddhist teaching are these pitiable creatures with huge hungry stomachs but they have pinhole mouths and their necks are so thin they can't swallow. So they remain hungry. I love this metaphor. So they exist because of their greed, envy, and jealousy. They have these huge stomachs, tiny throats, tiny mouths, so they can't ever fully fill themselves up. And the concept of hungry ghost is often accumulated with addiction, obsession, compulsion, trying to acquire more stuff. And it's a huge metaphor for suffering. And I would argue that without a spiritual path or some spiritual grounding, we experience a chronic emptiness like the hungry ghost, such as I did before finding this path. It's an emptiness, it's a hunger. You know, in other traditions, just for me, this is unique to all of us, just never served to fill that emptiness. They just didn't speak to me. And I remember when I first was introduced to these teachings, it was like getting hit in the face. It's like, this makes incredible sense to me. This resonates with me at a deep level. I think I've found my path. And my gratitude for the grounding from this path is immense because it has never disappointed. I've disappointed myself in terms of the diligence of my pursuit of it, but the teachings have never let me down. In Buddhism, devotion is not defined by an object of devotion, you know, like a deity or some other external thing. It's defined by an open-heartedness and the love we bring to an object or activity or to others. Rumi said, and I love this quote, there are 1,000 ways to kneel and kiss the ground. There are 1,000 ways to kneel and kiss the ground. Meaning that anything can be an act of devotion that connects us to something larger than ourselves. There are 1,000 ways to kneel and kiss the ground. And here I'm not talking about devotion as a transactional thing which we practice to get a payoff. You know, devotion is its own reward because it's about presence. It's about not about things. It's about presence with an open heart, with discernment, with wisdom. You know, such as taking in the wonder of nature. You know, my devotion really gets a jump start when I'm out in nature. I can just, you know, I just love being out there and the awe that we feel when we open to the beauty of the world. That's the kind of devotion I'm talking about. The joy that we feel when we practice generosity. You know, devotion motivates us to work for the betterment of everyone as it reflects the values and ethics that the Buddha taught. It exists on that foundation of values and ethics. That's the kind of devotion. And finally, devotion is a source of energy and motivation that keeps our practice alive and keeps us motivated on the path. So that's sort of a dharmic take on devotion. Let's hear what you have to think about that.